The conclave of Solon had no word for patience. Not because they lacked the concept. The Solon lived for 300 standard cycles, and in that time a single elder might outlast 4 civilizations, but because to the Solon, patience was not a virtue. It was a wound. A thing that happened to you when the universe refused to move at the speed your mind demanded. They did not celebrate patience. They endured it, the way a body endures fever. Elder Vosterin sat inside the conclave's primary observation chamber, which was carved entirely from the bone-white mineral of their home moon, Selith. The chamber had no windows. The Solon did not trust glass. Instead, the walls were alive with threadlight, a living bioluminescent lattice grown from the roots of a fungal organism that responded to proximity, thought density, and emotional frequency. Right now, every thread in the chamber was burning a deep, furious crimson. Because what the thread light was responding to, what was making 300 senior Solon officials sweat through their translucent skin membranes, was the holographic projection floating at the center of the room. 500,000 ships. Not a fleet. The word fleet was too small, too tidy, too human, and that word, human, had stopped being a casual reference point 7 cycles ago. It had become something else. A weather condition. A geological event. A thing that happened to you. 500,000 ships were arranged in a formation that should have been mathematically impossible. Not because of the scale, civilizations had moved large fleets before, but because of the geometry. The ships were organized in a pattern that the conclave's 12 finest spatial strategists had been analyzing for 19 hours, and not a single one of them could determine whether it was an attack formation or a defensive one. That was the problem. That had always been the problem with humanity. You could never tell what they were doing until they had already done it, and by then, the universe had shifted in ways you hadn't budgeted for. Vosterin pressed 3 of her 6 fingers against the soft cartilage of her jaw, a Solon gesture that had no precise translation but landed somewhere between I am thinking and I am afraid to stop thinking, and studied the projection. The ships were not moving. They had not moved in 31 hours. 500,000 warships, positioned in a sphere that encompassed the outer boundary of the Nara system, a system that held 4 inhabited worlds, 2 Solon colony stations, and the ancient relay of Methsora, which had been transmitting navigational data to every known civilization for 4,000 years. It was the kind of place you did not surround with warships unless you wanted the entire galaxy to understand something. And the galaxy understood. Every species with a functioning communications array had gone quiet within hours of the fleet's arrival. Not silent, quiet. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of sound but the presence of held breath. 12 separate civilizations had sent emergency envoys to the conclave in the past day. 3 of them had arrived visibly shaking, which was notable because 2 of those species did not have the musculature required for trembling and had apparently developed it specifically for this occasion. Vosterin stood. Someone, she said, in the low register that her species used for commands they hoped would not have to be repeated, explain to me again what they said. The exact words. Not the translation summary. Not the diplomatic softening. The exact words. A junior officer whose thread-light filaments, grown into his skin at birth like all Solon, were cycling through anxious pale green stepped forward and read from a data membrane. We are here. We remember. We are not leaving until this is resolved. Humanity, Sol Tertiary Fleet Command. Silence. The crimson in the chamber deepened. We are here. 3 words. The Solon used, on average, 47 words to open a formal interstellar communication. Even their slang was elaborate. The idea that a civilization capable of deploying 500,000 vessels would reduce its declaration of presence to 3 words was, it was. It's psychologically aggressive, said conclave speaker Deathmorin, who was old enough to remember the first time humanity had entered Solon territorial space, back when they'd been a novelty. Back when the conclave's greatest philosophers had argued warmly over whether humans were civilized by any meaningful standard, back when trembling was not yet something you did at the mention of their name. 3 words is not a message. 3 words is a grip. They are grabbing the collar of the galaxy and waiting to see who flinches. We flinch, said someone from the back of the chamber. No one argued. Outside the bone-white walls of the conclave chamber, in the cold dark between star systems, 500,000 ships held position. They did not hail. They did not maneuver. They did not make demands. They waited. And somehow, that was the most terrifying thing of all. Her name was Mara Voss. Not a relation to Elder Voss Terran. The name was a coincidence, which the Solon had spent considerable analytical energy refusing to believe, because the Solon did not trust coincidences, and the universe kept offering them humans anyway. Mara Voss was 44 years old. She had gray threading through dark hair that she wore pulled back tightly, not out of vanity, but because loose hair in 0G was a logistical problem she had solved permanently at age 22 and never revisited. She had a scar along her left collarbone from an incident she did not discuss, and a habit of going very, very still when she was thinking hardest, a stillness so complete that the biometric sensors on Solon stations had twice logged her as non-functional during diplomatic talks. She was not a general. She was not an admiral. She held the title of Concordance Architect, which was a human designation that had taken the Solon's translation matrices 14 months to render into something meaningful, and even now they weren't fully confident. The closest Solon equivalent was something like, which was either the most sophisticated diplomatic title they had ever encountered or the most arrogant, and they had still not decided which. She arrived at Conclave Station alone. One ship, a vessel so small that the docking bay's automated systems had initially categorized it as debris and rerouted it twice. She corrected the categorization herself, over open comms, in perfect Solon tertiary dialect, the formal register, the one used only in conclave chambers and funeral rites, and requested berth assignment with the same tone a person uses when asking for a glass of water. Voss Terran watched her walk off the ship on the monitor feed. Mara Voss stepped onto Solon soil. Well, the station's composite flooring, which was grown from Solon soil cultures for atmospheric familiarity, and looked around the docking bay the way you look around a room when you are committing it to memory and don't want anyone to notice that you are. She was carrying a single bag, a soft-sided thing, worn at one corner, with two external pouches. It was the kind of bag that implied a person who packed efficiently and had done this many times. She was not armed. The station sensors confirmed this in 17 different ways. The Conclave security chief confirmed it once more personally, and then stood in the monitoring room looking at his confirmation with an expression of deep unease, because an unarmed human diplomat walking alone onto a Solon station while 500,000 warships held position outside was somehow less reassuring than if she had been carrying weapons. Weapons, you understood. This calm, this single worn bag, this one person arriving to speak for a fleet that had made the galaxy hold its breath, this was something else. Voss Terran went to meet her personally. This was not protocol. Protocol said the conclave speaker received arriving envoys, processed them through ceremonial greeting, and passed them up the chain. Voss Terran was the eldest of the Elder Council. She did not have receiving lines. But she found herself walking to the docking bay anyway, her six-finger hands folded behind her back, her threadlight cycling through colors she chose not to examine too closely. Mara Voss saw her coming and waited. Just waited. Without posturing. Without adjusting her stance into something impressive. She simply stood there, bag at her side, and when Voss Terran stopped 3 feet away, Mara looked at her with dark eyes that had the quality of depth. Not wisdom, not coldness, but the specific depth of a person who has looked at a great many terrible things and made a great many difficult decisions, and is still, somehow, here. Elder Voss Terran, Mara said, in the Solon tertiary dialect. Thank you for coming yourself. I was curious, Voss Terran said, which was the most honest answer and therefore, by Solon values, the correct one. Good, said Mara. Curiosity is the right thing to feel right now. Voss Terran studied her. And not fear? Mara considered these questions with a kind of genuine consideration that Voss Terran had not expected. Not the performative pause of a diplomat weighing strategy. Actual thought. Fear is also correct, she said finally. I'll allow you to be afraid. But I'd like it if you let curiosity sit next to the fear while we talk. I think you'll need both to understand what I'm here to say. Voss Terran said nothing. They walked. The conference room that the conclave had prepared was a masterpiece of atmospheric intimidation. High vaulted ceilings grown from the pale mineral, Thread light arrays calibrated to a color frequency that Solon neurologists had determined produced a mild deference response in most humanoid species, and a table so long that the person at the opposite end was technically in a different climate zone. Mara Voss sat at the far end, as offered. She put her bag down beside her chair. She folded her hands on the table. She waited. 12 members of the Elder Council filed in, each taking their assigned position with the choreographed precision of a species that had been conducting these rituals for 4,000 years. Each one, as they sat, glanced at Mara Voss with the particular expression of people who had been told to project authority and were finding it harder than expected. Conclave speaker Deathmoran spoke first, as tradition demanded. The opening address was 48 sentences long. It explained the conclave's authority, the laws that protect the Nara system, the history that supports viewing the current fleet's position as a threat under galactic common law, and the conclave's official request for an immediate pullback. Mara Voss listened to all 48 sentences, without moving, without changing her expression, without so much as blinking. It was at an unusual rate. When Deathmoran finished, she said, 7 cycles ago, the conclave signed the Seleth Compact. 1 sentence. We are aware of the Compact's provisions, Deathmoran began. The Compact, Mara said, not loudly, not rudely, but with a quality of direction that relocated the center of the conversation without asking permission, included Article 9. Subsection 4. The Mutual Defense Provision. Specifically, the clause defined mutual as extending to any signatory civilization facing an existential threat from a non-signatory power. A pause. We remember, said Voss Terran, from her position at the near end of the table. Then you remember what we did, Mara said. When the Dren Collective moved against the Petheri, it was a significant event. Silence. The Dren Collective. Even 3 cycles after their dissolution, the name carried weight. The Dren had been not evil exactly. Evil was too simple, too human a word, said humanity's own diplomatic manuals, with considerable irony. The Dren had been efficient. They had believed, with the serene conviction of a species that had never lost a war, that the universe organized itself most elegantly when the less capable civilizations gracefully made room for the more capable ones. The Petheri had been a small species. Quiet. Extraordinary mathematicians. They had lived on 3 worlds in the outer spiral and had never built a warship in their 4,000-year history because they had decided, collectively, at a cultural level so deep it was encoded in their poetry and their children's first songs, that they did not wish to be the kind of people who built naval vessels. The Dren had found this charming and fatal in equal measure, until humanity had arrived. Not with diplomacy, not with warnings, with warships. Not 500,000 of them. That was now, that was here. Back then, 7 cycles ago, the number was 60,000. 60,000 vessels appeared between the Dren Advance Fleet and the last Petheri world, and a single message, short enough to fit on a placard, brutal enough to have been discussed in galactic political philosophy courses ever since. Step back. This is the only time we say it. The Dren had not believed them. The Dren Collective no longer existed. Mara Voss looked around the table at 12 Solon elders and said, in a voice that was almost gentle, I am not here because humanity wants something from the conclave. I am not here to threaten you. I am not here to negotiate a withdrawal, because the fleet's presence is not a negotiating position. Then what? Said Deathmoran carefully. Is it? A memory, Mara said. We are here because something is coming toward the Nara system, and it does not know about the Seleth Compact, and it does not care about Article 9, and it has not yet reached the range where your long sensors will detect it. But ours did 41 hours ago. The thread light in the room went pale. Pale, in Solon chromatic language, was not a peaceful color. It was the color of understanding something you would rather not understand. The data package Mara Voss placed on the table was small. A flat transfer crystal, the kind used for high-density information exchange, with a Solon standard interface on one end. She slid it across the table without ceremony, just as you would slide someone the bill for a meal you both knew was coming. Voss Terran picked it up. I pressed it against the table's input membrane. Watched. The room watched with her. What appeared in the holographic space above the table was not, at first, recognizable as anything. It looked like a density map, masses of gravitational data represented as color gradients, shifting yellows and deep purples, the way cartographers mapped things they could not directly see, but could measure by the way everything else bent around them. Then the scale marker appeared in the corner of the display. Solon unit of spatial measurement, 1 Kethrin, approximately 2.3 light-years. The anomaly was 11 Kethrin wide. Someone at the table made a sound that was not a word. "We don't have a name for it yet," Mara said. "Our science teams have been working on classification for 19 hours. Right now we are calling it the Veil, because that is the word one of our analysts used when she first saw the data, and it stuck. It's not a fleet. It's not a weapon, not in any way we currently understand the term. It is a..." She paused, and this pause was different from her other pauses. This one had texture in it. Something not quite comfortable. "It is a process. This is a physical process on a scale for which we do not have good language, and it is moving through the outer spiral toward the Nara system at a speed that our current models cannot fully account for." "What does it do?" Vosterin asked. "From what we can reconstruct from 2 systems that it has already passed through," Mara said, "it reorganizes matter. Not destroyed. Reorganizes. The systems it has moved through, they're still there. The stars are still burning. But everything between the stars, everything in the orbital bands, the planets, the structures, the things that we're living, has been rearranged at a molecular level into patterns that our physicists say are mathematically elegant, and our biologists say are completely incompatible with any known organic chemistry." Silence. Very deep silence. "How long," said Vosterin, "until it reaches the Nara system?" "At current velocity," Mara said, 72 hours. The thread light pulsed. Crimson bled back into the pale. "And the fleet," said Deathmorin, and then stopped, because the question that completed that sentence, "What can the fleet do?" suddenly sounded different than it had an hour ago. An hour ago, the fleet was the threat.
"Now." "We don't know," Mara said. Her voice was steady.
Not the steadiness of someone who was not afraid. The steadiness of someone who had chosen, very deliberately, what to do with their fear. "We have never encountered anything like the Veil. We have theories. We have weapons designed on principles that might interact with the process in ways that slow or deflect it. We have mathematicians working on models. We have 500,000 ships and everything aboard them and every human alive who volunteered to be here, and we have 72 hours. She looked at Vosterin. "We also have Article 9, she said quietly. "We are not asking your permission. We were never asking your permission. But I am here because the compact means we fight beside you, not in front of you, and that means you need to understand what is coming and what we intend to do, and—"
She stopped.
For the first time since she had entered the room, something in her face shifted. Something small. Something that, on a less controlled person, might have been the edge of something vast and frightening underneath. "And I am here," she said, very quietly, "because if this endeavor does not work, and if the Veil reaches Nara before we slow it, then I want someone to know that we tried. I want someone who is not human to know that we stood in front of it. I want that to be witnessed." The room was very still. Vosterin looked at this human woman with her worn bag and her scar and her absolute precision and her one small fracture and felt something move in her chest that the Solon did not have good words for either. The next 12 hours were the most concentrated exercise in cross-species knowledge transfer that had occurred in the history of the Galactic Common Record, a fact that would later be noted in the record itself, added by a Solon archivist who had been in the room and who wrote, in the margin of his official entry, in small personal notation script, "I have never seen anything like it and I do not expect to again." Mara Voss did not sleep. This was not unusual for her during operations. She had a practiced ability to compress rest into short, dense intervals, 20 minutes here, 30 there, slotted into the gaps of a schedule the way you fit extra luggage into a bag that shouldn't have room. But she was also running on something beyond physiology. She was running on the specific energy of a person who has spent years building toward a moment and is now in the moment and does not intend to waste a second of it. The Conclave opened its archives.
This was not a small thing.
The Solon archives were 4,000 years deep, and the Conclave had never, not once in recorded history, granted a non-Solon entity open access. Vos Terran approved it in just 4 minutes, which was about 4,000 years quicker than usual, and when her council raised concerns, she simply said, "Find the precedent later," a phrase that would later be noted as one of the most important statements in Solon administrative history. What Mara was looking for was geometry. Specifically, she was looking for any record in the Solon 4,000-year database of a physical process that matched the Veil's pattern of molecular reorganization. Not the same phenomenon, she did not expect that. But adjacent phenomena. Things that had been studied and set aside. Mathematical curiosities in the archive's physics logs. Anomalous sensor readings from early exploration records that had been categorized as instrument error. "You're searching for a language," said Vos Terran, who had not left the archive chamber either. Mara looked up from the data membrane she was reading. "Say more." "You are not looking for a weapon to use against it," the elder said slowly, her threadlight tracing thoughtful pale gold. "You are looking for a way to understand what it is doing, so that you can speak to it in terms it already uses." Mara was quiet for a moment. "That's one of the most accurate things anyone has said to me this week," she said. "Yes. The Veil is not attacking," Vos Terran said. "You said reorganizing. You said molecularly. Mathematically elegant patterns." "Yes. Then it is making something. That's what our physicists think. We don't know what. We don't know if the thing it's making is intentional, if there is intention involved at all. It might be purely mechanical. A process with no agent behind it, like weather, like erosion." "Then why 500,000 ships?" Vos Terran asked. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. "If you cannot shoot weather." "Because we don't know yet," Mara said. "And when you don't know, you bring everything. You bring everything you have, you put it in front of it, and you see what it does. How it responds. What it adjusts for. What it ignores." She paused. "The ships are not a weapon. They're a probe. The largest probe in human history." Vos Terran sat back. The threadlight around her went still. Not blink, but still. The color of deep thought. "You built a probe," she said, "out of 500,000 warships." "We built a statement," Mara said. "We put something in its path that it cannot ignore without telling us something. If it moves around us, we learn. If it stops, we learn. If it tries to reorganize the fleet, it tells you how it interacts with organized matter," Vos Terran said, very quietly. "At which point we have exactly the data we need to build something that might actually work." Mara turned back to the data membrane. "But I want to know what it's building before we do anything else. Because if this process is constructive, if it is not malicious, if there is no malice in it because there is no mind in it, or because the mind in it has a purpose we have not imagined, then interrupting it is not obviously the right choice." Silence. "You are considering," Vos Terran said slowly, "that the correct response to a thing moving toward for inhabited worlds to reorganize all matter within them might be to not stop it." "I am considering that the correct response to something I don't understand," Mara said, "is to understand it first. And then decide." Outside in the dark, 500,000 ships held their position. Inside the archive, 2 women from different species, with different physiologies, histories, and ways of understanding the universe, sat with the same data, the same 72 hours, and the same question. "What are you?" The answer, or the beginning of the answer, came from a Solon geological survey completed 2,300 years ago. A routine deep space mapping mission to the far outer spiral, logged by a captain named HFY, filed under the category of notable anomalies / no further action required, and not open since. Mara found it at the 4th hour of archive searching. She read it once. Rapidly, the way she read things, she needed to hold them in her whole mind before she could start taking them apart. Then she read it again, slowly. Then she said, "Vos Terran." The elder crossed the room and read the record. Captain HFY, 2,300 years ago, had mapped a system in the far outer spiral and found something strange. Not the Veil. This was too early for the Veil, which humanity's backtracked trajectory data suggested had only entered the galactic plane approximately 400 years ago. What HFY had found was a remnant. A system where all the planets had been reorganized. The same molecular signature the veil was leaving now, close enough that Vosteran's hands stilled when she saw the spectral comparison. Mara had already run into shapes that the survey team had been unable to classify. Ethvoritha's personal log, which was officially filed but seldom read, had 17 pages of guesses that her bosses had kindly called too philosophical and not accurate enough scientifically. But one paragraph caught their attention. The patterns are not random. But one paragraph stopped them both. The patterns are not random. I have looked at them for 6 days now. They are not decorative. They are not weapons platforms. They are not any kind of infrastructure I recognize. But when I look at them, I keep thinking of one thing. I keep thinking of seeds. Not seeds as storage. Seeds as signal. The way a seed is not a plant but contains a plant, the way it is not communication but potential. What if something is not building here but writing here? What if we are looking at a sentence in a language that requires 1,000 years and a specific kind of listener to read? Mara set down the data membrane.
Seeds, she said.
Or signal, Vosteran said. They looked at each other. If the veil is not destroying, Mara said carefully, and not building infrastructure, and the pattern is consistent across multiple systems, the same 2,000-year-old pattern, remnant matching current output, then it is either an automated process repeating the same message across the galaxy, or it is one very long sentence, Vosteran said. And the Nara system, Mara said, is the next word. 40 hours to contact. Mara was back on her ship, not to rest, but because her ship had a communications array more sophisticated than the Conclave stations, built on human engineering principles that prioritize speed and range over the Solan preference for signal fidelity, and she needed to talk to the fleet. She opened a channel to Fleet Admiral Ren Torres. Ren was a tall man who had spent 30 years in deep space and had the quality of someone who had been genuinely surprised by nothing for a long time. Not because he lacked imagination, but because he had imagined enough terrible things early in his career that the universe had been working down his list ever since. When Mara told him what she and Vosteran had found, he was quiet for a long time. "You're telling me," he said finally, "that it might be writing. I'm telling you it might be written. And the 4 inhabited worlds in the Nara system are what? The paper. The medium," Mara said. "We don't know if the process is harmful to anything currently living there. The 2 systems in the outer spiral where we saw the veil pass through were not inhabited. We have no data on what it does to people," Rin said. "To organize organic matter into living systems."
She paused.
"To people." Another silence. "Do you want me to move the fleet to intercept or not, Mara?" Bren asked. Not impatiently. With the specific fatigue of someone who knows that the person on the other end of the line is the only one who should be making this call. "I want you to move the fleet to intercept position," she said. "But I want 12 ships, our best long sensor arrays, placed at the leading edge between the veil and the fleet. I want them to do nothing but listen. Record everything. Every frequency, every subatomic emission, every gravitational fluctuation. For the first 2 hours after the veil makes contact with the fleet's position, nothing fires." Ren looked at her through the screen. "You're giving it 2 hours?" "I'm giving us 2 hours," she said, "to hear what it says. And if it starts reorganizing the lead ships?" Mara's jaw tightened. "Just slightly. Then we have our answer, and we use everything we have." "And the lead crew?" Silence.
"They volunteered," she said.
"All 12 ships volunteered specifically for this position." A pause. "I asked them. I told them what it meant. I told them there was a version of this where what they are is the first line of a conversation, and a version where what they are is..." She stopped. "They volunteered." Ren looked at her for a long moment. "What are you hoping for, Mara?" She was quiet. "I'm hoping," she said finally, very quietly, "that it's a sentence. And that we're smart enough to hear it." The 4 worlds of the Nara system had been told. This had been Mara's non-negotiable condition before any other planning began. The people on those worlds had the right to know what was coming. Full disclosure. All data is included, with all uncertainty and no smoothing of the probabilities. The Conclave had pushed back, not out of cruelty, but out of a deeply held Solan conviction that populations should be protected from destabilizing information until leaders had developed stabilizing responses to accompany it. Mara had listened to this argument with her characteristic stillness and then said, "They are the ones who cannot leave. Everything we are doing is for them. They deserve to know what we know, when we know it, in terms they can understand." That is not a negotiating point. The conclave had yielded. The broadcasts went out. What happened on those 4 worlds in the following 12 hours was not panic, or not only panic. It was something more complex and more human in the largest sense, the sense that applied not just to her own species but to any species that had ever looked at the dark and known the dark was looking back. People gathered. In plazas, in homes, and in the deep communal spaces of the Solan colony stations, bioluminescent threadlight wove through the architecture and responded to the gathered emotional weight of thousands of people sitting together in the dark. They told each other things. Important things. True things. Things that had been waiting for an occasion that felt large enough. Mara received a message from the governor of the largest Solan colony in the Nara system, an administrator named Pelsorith who was, by his own description in the message, terrified, and who wanted her to know that in the 10 hours since the broadcast, the colony's emergency communication network had been used almost exclusively not for evacuation requests. There was nowhere to evacuate to in time, but for personal messages. Family members were reconnecting with each other. Old connections reopened. Children ask their parents questions about their lives that they have meant to ask for years. "I don't know if this information," Pelsorith wrote, "is what you intended when you said people deserve to know. But I think you should know what that knowledge has produced." Mara read the message twice. She forwarded it to Vos Terran with no added text. Vos Terran responded 4 minutes later with a single Solan glyph, a character used in ancient formal writing pre-conclave that had fallen out of everyday use. It meant, roughly, the kind of sorrow that is also, strangely, a kind of beauty. Mara saved it. Then she went back to work. 17 hours ahead of the projected timeline, the Veil arrived. Not because it had accelerated. Because their timeline models had been wrong. The Veil did not move the way that mass moved, the way that even energy moved. The Solan sensor arrays, adjusted twice with human engineering guidelines, confirmed what earlier data had hinted at but their models wouldn't accept. The Veil moved through potential. It occupied the space it was going to be before the rest of physics had finished deciding to let it. The 12 lead ships were in position. Fleet Admiral Rentorez was on an open channel with Mara. She was on the conclave station. Vos Terran was beside her. The entire Elder Council was in the chamber, and the threadlight was doing something none of them had ever seen it do. It was cycling through colors without settling, running through the full spectrum in slow waves, as if the building's living nervous system could not decide what this moment was. The Veil reached the lead ship's position. And stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Like a thing that had been moving with total confidence, and had then noticed something. Ren's voice came over the channel, low and controlled. "It stopped. Mara, it stopped. I see it." "What does that mean?" "It means it noticed us." Silence on the channel. On all channels. Every civilization watching on long-range sensors had gone silent within seconds of the Veil's arrival. The galaxy is holding its breath again, but differently now. Not with dread. With something that did not have a clean name in any language. 5 minutes. 10. Mara was watching the sensor feeds from the lead ships. The data streams were extraordinary. The Veil was dense with information, complex subatomic emissions in patterns that her analysts were already flagging as non-random, layered structures repeating at different scales the way fractals repeated, the way language repeated. "It's doing something," said the lead ship commander, Captain Danny Cho, a young woman with the steady voice of someone who had decided not to waste her last potential transmission on anything other than useful data. "The emissions they're changing. They're orienting toward us. Toward the ships. Like a pause. Like a question. It feels like a question." "Hold position," Mara said. "Holding." Vos Terran reached out and placed one 6-fingered hand on Mara's arm. "Not a grip. Just contact us. Presence." "What do we do?" she asked. "We already did it," Mara said softly. "We came here. 500,000 ships, and we didn't fire. We showed up and we didn't fire, and it's been watching us for. The sensor feed spiked. From the 12 lead ships, a burst of organized energy emerged simultaneously. Not destructive. Not an impact. The best description the analysts would produce in the frenzied hours of data processing that followed was response. The veil had emitted something structured, complex, and layered, in the direction of the 12 human ships. In the direction of the people. Captain Danny Cho's voice came back, and she sounded the way people sound after something has changed in them very quickly, and they have not yet had time to understand what changed. We're intact. All systems nominal. But there's the emission passed through us. Not around. Through. And my science lead is a breath. She says the patterns in the emission match the molecular reorganization signature. The same patterns. But they didn't reorganize anything. They just touched. She's saying, another pause. A longer one. She's saying they feel like an introduction. What followed was not a conversation, in any sense that language usually means. There were no words. There was no translation matrix that could bridge the veil's actions with the communication systems of humans, Solon, or any known species. But the teams working on the data, human physicists and Solon archive mathematicians working in shifts, sharing screens, arguing in 3 languages with a 4th being invented in real time between them, began to see structure. The veil's emissions were layered. The surface layer was dense and fast, information density, so high that it looked like noise until you found the rhythm underneath. The rhythm was regular but not a pulse. It was not the pattern you looked for first. It was more like breath. It resembled the space between steps. The second layer, underneath, was geometric. Repeating structures at different scales that corresponded, imperfectly, intriguingly, to the molecular patterns it had left in the outer spiral systems it had passed through. The third layer was what one Solon mathematician, in a note to her colleague that would be cited in academic work for the next 3 centuries, described as wanting. Not desire in the biological sense. Not hungry. But the quality of a system that is incomplete and knows it is incomplete and is oriented toward something. The way a question is oriented toward an answer. It's not alone, said Mara. She was reading the layer analysis on her screen. Voss Terran was reading it beside her. Explain, said Voss Terran. These patterns, the third layer, the orientational layer, they're not self-contained. They're referential. They point outward. Mara's finger traced the data representation on the membrane. There's something else. Something this process is communicating to, or for, or toward. The veil isn't the whole message. It's the medium. Something, is using it the way we use a signal array. From where? Voss Terran asked. Mara pulled up the backtracked trajectory analysis, not just 41 hours back, but as far as their data could reach, stitching together the outer spiral remnants and the veil's current position, and the mathematical curve of its path. It came from the galactic core. 400 years ago, something in the galactic core had initiated a process that had been moving outward through the spiral ever since, leaving reorganized systems in its wake, not destroying, not building infrastructure, but writing. Leaving marks that matched each other. That was, the analysts were now increasingly confident, the same mark over and over. The same glyph, repeated in matter itself, at the scale of solar systems. What does it say? Voss Terran asked. Her voice was almost inaudible. One of the human physicists, a young man who had not slept in 30 hours, whose hands were shaking slightly, and whose face bore the expression of someone who had just understood something they were not equipped to understand, turned from his screen. It's a name, he said. We think. The closest analog we can construct, it's a name. Or the concept of a name. The concept of I exist, and I have always existed, and I am here. Silence. The veil had crossed 1,000 light years, reorganized the matter of empty systems, interrupted the operation of the galaxy's most important navigational relay, and made the most powerful civilizations in known space hold their breath. To say, I am here. There was a vote. This was not a formal conclave procedure. Not a military command chain decision. Mara Voss stood on a channel connected to every human ship in the fleet, to the conclave Elder Council, to the governors of the 4 Nara worlds, and to every species who had sent an observer to watch this event unfold, and she said, "We have 3 choices, and I will tell you what I think of each of them. The first step is to engage the Veil with all our resources and prevent it from reaching the Nara system. Our models say this has approximately a 40% chance of working. It would take everything, and we would lose ships, and we might fail anyway, and if we do this and fail, we will have told whatever is at the galactic core, whatever is sending this, that the inhabitants of this spiral answered its introduction by trying to destroy its message. The second is to do nothing. Let it pass through the Nara system. We don't know what that means for the people there. We think it might not be harmful. We are not certain. The third is this," we respond. "We have physicists who have been working for the last 6 hours on a way to use the fleet's combined energy array output to produce a structured emission, not a weapon, an emission, that uses the geometric patterns the Veil is producing. Not as an attack. Not as a barrier. As a reply." A very long silence. "We cannot guarantee it will be understood. We cannot guarantee it will stop the Veil from proceeding. We cannot guarantee anything. What we can do is answer. We can say, we are here too. We hear you. We are small, and we are frightened, and we have been here in this spiral for a very short time, and we do not know what you are, but we are not going to pretend we didn't hear you." She stopped. "I am not going to tell you what to choose," she said. "I will tell you what I would choose. But the people on those 4 worlds, and the crew of 500,000 ships, and the civilizations watching from a safe distance have as much right to this decision as I do." The channel was open for 20 minutes. What came back in pieces, from the fleet and the worlds and the watching civilizations, was not unanimous. 7 species formally abstained. 4 dissented. The conclave voted 11-1 in favor. The crew of the fleet, 500,000 ships, millions of people voted. The margin was not close. The emission took 9 minutes to build and 3 seconds to transmit. Every ship in the fleet contributed. The energy array outputs were calibrated using the geometric patterns from the Veil's own second-layer emissions. The team had worked out a rough correspondence between the repeating structures, enough to build something that was not random, that was shaped, that had the quality of intentionality the same way the Veil's patterns had the quality of intentionality. What they transmitted was simple. It was, the physicists would later say, approximately equivalent to acknowledged. "Possibly, we hear you. Possibly, depending on which layer of the geometric correspondence you trusted most. We are here too." It was not a masterpiece of communication. It was not precise. It was the equivalent of a person hearing a sound in the dark and calling back. Not words, just sound, just presence, just the signal that says you are not sending your voice into emptiness. The Veil received it. The Veil paused. Not the way it had paused at contact, the careful, examining pause of a process encountering something unexpected. This pause was different. The analysts, watching the emission data, said it was different. The third layer, the wanting, the orientational quality, shifted. Changed direction. The incomplete system quality of it, the quality of a question, did not disappear. But it changed shape. As if the question had been heard. As if that was all it needed. The Veil held its position at the boundary of the Nara system for 4 hours. During those 4 hours, it continued emitting. The patterns grew more complex, layered on more layers, more than their models could process in real time, data that would take years to fully analyze. Then, with the same quality of certainty with which it had arrived, it turned. Not far from the Nara system, as if repelled. Not back the way it had come. It turned along the curve of the spiral, following a path, the analysts noted with shaking hands, that would take it through uninhabited regions, through the spaces between systems, rather than through the systems themselves. As if they had learned something about the neighborhood. As if it had been told, there are people here. As if that information had mattered. It did not speak again, not that day, not in ways their current tools could interpret. But the emissions continued as it moved. The long, quiet signal, like a name repeated. I am here. I am here. I am here. And now, underneath it, it was threaded into the pattern in such a way that 3 separate human physicists and 2 Solon mathematicians independently identified it before anyone said it aloud. Something new. Something that had not been in the signal before. Something that corresponded in the rough geometric language they had begun to build, to, you are here. Voss Terran found Mara sitting in the observation bay of the conclave station afterward. Not celebrating. Not debriefing. Just sitting, with her worn bag beside her and her hands folded in her lap, watching the place where the veil had been. The elder sat beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The galaxy watched in terror. Voss Terran said finally, "That is how they will describe this. In the histories. In the way other civilizations tell the story."
Probably, Mara said.
They will say, humanity unleashed 500,000 warships, and the galaxy trembled. That's what it looked like, Mara said. Voss Terran was quiet for a moment. What was it actually? Mara thought about this. This section discusses the 12 volunteers in the lead ships. About Pell, Sortha's message is about people telling each other important things in the dark. About a 2,300-year-old captain named Ethvorath who had looked at reorganized planets and thought, seeds. This signal has traveled from the galactic core for 400 years, repeating the same message across the scale of solar systems. I am here. It was us answering, she said. That's all. Ab SYMJHY is whacked Jo Kuch Biatahai, hum jawab dia, firing Kibajay. That's the thing that happened. And if it comes back? Voss Terran asked.
Then we listen again, Mara said.
And we learn more. And we answer better. She picked up her worn bag. She stood. She looked at the space where something enormous and ancient and perhaps lonely had crossed the galaxy to say its name and had found, against all its probable calculations, that someone had said, "We hear you." "Caro," she said softly, a word in one of the old human languages she'd grown up hearing, meaning something close to do, or act, or make it happen. "Caro, that's the whole job. That's always been the whole job." She turned and walked back toward the light. "Yendi,"